Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. This is Labs Weekly number 4. Today we have a few of us joined to talk about some pretty awesome things. We had some questions about some web scraping from a few of our internal associates, and we thought we'd talk about some of that today. And I'll kind of hand it over to Dan Amadeo to talk about it and jump right in.
Yeah, so we'll let's build up like a web scraper from scratch. And Adam and I know got a lot of thoughts on web scraping, so we can go back and forth, I guess, on some of the difficulties, some of the things you got to keep in mind. Obviously, like going and scraping data from other people's websites can be a little questionably legal against their terms of service. There's some legal precedent, right? I have to look it up. But recently there was a case, I think, of some company that got sued for scraping LinkedIn data, and the courts were like, yeah, it's public domain. You can't say people can't scrape it. So I think that if you're scraping data for like corporate uses, you definitely need to like go and proof out that it's okay. Websites are still totally in their right to block you if they detect you're sending them tons of traffic. So one of the things we'll show is how to mask that a little bit, make it harder to identify, but also be a little bit more polite in scraping and not just blasting sites with traffic, because that can be it can be easy to get blocked that way. And I don't know, I would imagine being a little salty if someone was like just giving me essentially a denial of service attack on my website that I'm hosting. But there's a lot of useful reasons you might want to scrape stuff. For example, I run some side projects scraping data off of Reddit, subreddits, content, stuff like that. A lot of people have been scraping Pastebin for sensitive information, security monitoring, and pen testing, or nefarious hacking. I don't know. But recently they took away their scraping API. There was an API for this. So now if you want to scrape Pastebin, you've got to do it manually. So thought that would be a cool example. We'll walk through how you would build a manual scraper for Pastebin, unless anybody wants to comment on other like cool uses for scraping or things to set that up.
Yeah, I've used web scraping to scrape for vulnerabilities before from like the NVD, the database for the National Vulnerability Database, and put them into like SQL and use that as vulnerability management inside of my company. But Dan's right. You do have to be careful, because if you're scraping data from like another database, you have to be sure that it's not proprietary, that they're not paying for that data, or they're not, selling an aggregated form of it as a service. So there's a lot of legalities to concern yourself with. What we're going to discuss today is completely legal and can only benefit you. So
yeah, I mean, I think the legalities, it's the data, right? Like you're scraping stuff that you obviously have access to, right? But there's legalities of, okay, now I have the data, can I use it somehow that I want to use it? But also like the denial of service thing, right? Like if you're sending a ton of traffic to a website, it could cause issues, right? So I think Dan and Adam will kind of go over some of the mitigations to mask or slow it down so it doesn't necessarily create that, that issue.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be more difficult depending on what data you're collecting, right? Another use that I've had for scraping is in open source intelligence gathering, OSINT, for doing pen tests, right? So, for example, scraping a list of usernames and profiles from LinkedIn to create a targeted list for brute force attacks, right? LinkedIn is a special case because they and and other sites use some like state tracking tokens throughout the app while you're clicking through things in your authenticated session. And it can be difficult to automate that in a script easily. So for that, I would use something like Selenium or Chrome driver, which is browser automation and maintains like a full state of your session with the app. And the way you automate that is a little different than what we're going to do today, because you would say, okay, find the button on the emulated page and click here, and so on and so forth. What we're going to do is pretty straightforward. So I'll start sharing, and we can look how you would build up a basic scraper in Python. So I have written scrapers in Python and in Node mostly are my preferences, but we're just going to use Python, and we'll use requests API. So a little bit of boilerplate. I'm just going to first start with a main method, and I made this new file getPastes.py. So we're going to pull the full lists of pastes from Pastebin. So we'll set up a little function here, and this is where we'll do the first request. I want to look first of all at the site and see what type of data we're going after, right? So Pastebin has this archive URL, which you get to off the main site, public pastes. It's got an archive of recent pastes that have publicly been shared on the site. So we want to look at the content here and find out what we've got to extract in our script, right? So if I go and view source, we see it's basically just a bunch of link tags that that have links to the different pastes, right? So eventually what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to pull this archive page. We're going to want to extract all of these links, and then we're going to want to make a request to each one of these guys and pull out the raw paste content. So first, let's pull the archive page, and I'm going to use the HTML parser library and requests to handle that. Another thing that I usually do, just again as boilerplate with any type of script automation to websites, is change the user agent header. If you don't do this with the Python requests API, for example, it's very easy for someone looking at logs or network traffic to determine that you're sending them scripted requests. In some cases that will get you blocked, and it's very noticeable. I don't know, people are on two sides of the fence here. It's like you're supposed to let sites see, like if you were running a search engine scraper, you're supposed to have a user agent that says, hey, I'm a search engine scraper, to let the sites, to courteously let the sites know that that's what you're doing. So this is a little bit, I don't know, Adam, do you have any thoughts on like,
it's deceitful, but it's
definitely deceitful.
It's a way that you can prevent yourself from getting blocked too. I've done arrays where it randomly selects different user agents, so it looks like it's just getting normal traffic throughout the entire scraping procedure. So it's deceitful, but this is a good way to prevent yourself from getting blocked or IP banned.
Yep. So just to show that this works really quick, we're going to print out the raw response from that page. And this is all of the same source data that we're looking at here, but we need to turn this into something useful and extract these links. And I'm going to use the HTML parser library with Python to do that. I think that the HTML parser library is probably, it may be more difficult to use than some of the other HTML parsing libraries like Beautiful Soup or something along those lines, but I have boilerplate to do it. Basically, you pass in and and you parse it as an AST. And if you're not familiar with what that is essentially is like a tree hierarchy, right? And we'll go through and get access to each one of these tags. And we really only care about A tags, link tags, because we want to extract the href attribute of those A tags. So I've put this together, and this code we'll publish after the video in a link below. And when we see a tag that is an A tag, we want to extract the link into this class element and go through and print all of those out. So for each link in the link parser object, we just print them. I'll show that that works. And we got a whole bunch of links we don't care about. We really just want these ones that are pastes. And I'm going to filter these out in kind of a cheating way. What you probably want to do is write, like in practice, is use some type of a regular expression or something to check that, you know, it's exactly the link you were expecting. So for example, you know, are we looking for user profiles? Are those going to start with like, you know, if link, you know, starts with user profile, then maybe you would handle them. In this case, I'm fairly certain that all of the links we really care about are only 9 characters long. So we can cheat a little bit and say if the length of the link is 9 characters, then we print it. And let's try that real quick. So that looks right, and we'll go with that for now.
One way that you could, if you wanted to, one way that you could improve that is there's a table that has a class maintainable or main table outside of these TRs. So you could actually grab that first and then iterate over this to find the anchor tags within that table.
Yep. Yeah, so sometimes you'll have links with class names also, or IDs that you can pull them out by. And there's other ways you can search if you build like if you build this up into an XML structure. You can do XREF searches as well, which I've used before. But those can be more elegant if the data parses in that way. And honestly, depending on what you're scraping, like Reddit, for example, is super easy to scrape because they have some JSON endpoints that are already structured, and you can pull the content out that way also. It's way easier. So let's build up a function to take each of these paste links now, and we want to make a request to those. So I'm going to make a new function, get paste by ID, and we'll end up passing those in each ID into this function. So new request to the link for that paste with our custom headers. And if we go to one of these as an example, let's just take you know, this CSGO auto accept whatever paste, and look at this. We really want to extract the raw content from whatever this paste is. This is a bunch of code that somebody wrote. We want this raw paste data, which we probably would end up dumping somewhere into a file, into a database, wherever we're storing the data we're scraping, right? So let's look at the source for this page and view raw paste data. View source. Raw paste data. So we're looking for the text area element in this case. We want all of the raw content in this text area tag. So I'm going to build a new parser, and I'm going to call this the text area parser over here in our script. And we're going to have a couple functions for this one. We need to know if we're in a text area context because we get 3 functions that we can use in this kind of HTML searcher. Entering a start tag, ending a tag. So as it's kind of going through this tree, I'm here, new tag context, and this is all the data we're looking for. And then we're here, not in a tag context anymore. So we need to know if we're inside of that tag, then we want to print the data out, right? So enter the tag, we say, yes, we're in text area, end tag, we're not in text area anymore. So that when this data function hits, we can say, hey, is that text area data? Yes, okay, that's what we were looking for. And I'm just gonna print out a bunch of asterisks to make it visible when we iterate through all these pastes. So for each link, we want to call the get paste by ID function and pass in the link. We could probably test that first with an individual paste so that we don't just like make a whole ton of requests that don't work. So get paste by ID. Make sure I didn't make any mistakes. And that doesn't work because we didn't pass the data into the text area parser. So let's add that real quick. So we make the request to that paste in this function. We take, create a new text area parser, pass that text into the text area parser, and then we should get the paste data. And there it is right there. So this is all the raw text area content from that paste. So we should be able to go through every single paste now, but one thing that we probably want to do is throttle the requests. We don't just want to like spam it all as fast as possible. So usually when I'm doing some scraping, I will set a minimum and a maximum threshold and then do some random delay in between there. So we can do that with import time, import random, and then if this is a link we care about, then we're going to get that paste content, and then we're going to sleep for some period of time, random.uniform, let's say between 0.5 seconds and 3 seconds. And then we should be able to pull them all. So there's a paste, little delay, there's another paste, little delay, and we keep going. So the only thing missing from this, I would say, is what we want to do with this data. So do we want to stick it in a SQLite database? Do we want to just dump them all into files in a directory? And that's kind of up to you and what you're using it for, what you're trying to accomplish. Do you want to store all of these pastes and search them separately? Do you really only care about pastes that have some string in them? Like only show me pastes that have password in the data, right? Like if that's what I'm looking for, and maybe that gets run every 5 minutes on a cron job and then notifies you. So
yeah, this is a good way to at least scraping Pastebin is a good way to check for password dumps. There's a lot of Twitter accounts and websites out there that do the same thing, that look for password dumps that get put into Pastebin. And so that'd be an example of what Dan's talking about. One additional note with that feature or that script that Dan laid out, there are additional components for something like Pastebin. They have a pro account. So if you have a pro account, you would need to also then use your credentials and able to run pro type scripts. So that's another consideration. Like Dan said, this is going to be public code for people to go check out. I encourage you to do it if you're learning how to run your own web script.
Yeah, and I think it'd be cool in the future we can walk through how you would do the same thing with Chrome driver and Selenium or something that is more complicated. Because like I said, I've written them for LinkedIn where you have to log in, you have to parse and say, okay, put my username in this field, put my password in this field, click the OK button, wait until login is complete. And it's you know, a few more steps involved, especially when you're handling authentication, but definitely when the site is expecting that you track a certain number of session cookies or submit certain tokens with each request while you're clicking through or filling things out. That can be quite a bit more complicated.
Certainly a different animal than Python. This was a pretty rudimentary example because we were, just showing how it worked. Dan mentioned Beautiful Soup, which is another parser. I'm a big fan of Beautiful Soup. You should check that out if you're learning as well. But I'd be eager to check out like using Chrome driver and Selenium and other web scraping tools as well.
Yeah. The other
Yeah,
thing is,
I was just gonna say if there's interest in that, we can, in the next weekly, we can go deeper into some of the Selenium stuff. If people have interest in it too.
well, and the other thing is to really do the math on how many requests you expect to need to scrape, right? So, for example, I have a little calculator here that I'll show to simplify some of the math. But if you're trying to request potentially up to, let's say we need to request 1,000,000 records. If I only have like a delay between 1 and 5 seconds, and I want to complete all 1,000,000 records in one day, I've got to make, close to 12 requests a second. I'm going to have to thread that up if I want to use these types of delay thresholds. If you do between a half a second and a second, you're really only making, again, like 12 requests a second. If you want to do it in, let's say we want to do that in half a day, you got to make 23 requests a second. You're going to have to use like 12 different threads, between 12 to 23 threads to get it done. So in some cases, you're going to have to spin up and have multiple endpoints if you don't want to get blocked. If you're running all these requests from a single IP, then you're going to create a lot of traffic. And especially if you're hitting something behind, like a denial of service limiting software like Cloudflare, they're going to see that you've spun up and made like 1,000 requests a second. Like that's way too much against somebody like Cloudflare. They're going to block you almost immediately. I've been successful behind Cloudflare on like a half a second to a second delay, or a half a second to 1.5 second delay. But I don't know if there's any overall threshold, like volume of requests that you make to them where they say like, that's too much, like now you're on a temporary ban, or something like that. You might have to distribute your requests across some proxies or VPNs or multiple AWS nodes in order to get everything done. For example, on one of my side projects, I make approximately 1 to 1.5 million requests to Imgur and Reddit across the period of usually 3 days to limit getting blocked by them. So you really got to spread it out, or distribute it depending on how quickly you need to get all of those requests done. So the math is pretty important.
And let us know if that's something that you want to, that you'd like us to demo. Write a comment, get in touch with one of us. That's something that would be a fun demo too, scaling out scripting like this. So.
Yeah, because in practice, I would probably have to use some type of a queue where you have multiple threads that are pulling jobs out of that queue to go and request the URLs if you're scaling up to a ton of scraping that you have to do. Just monitoring the most recent pastes on Pastebin probably going to be okay, because those don't seem to get updated super frequently. A single thread every couple of minutes, just going and checking to see if there's anything new, not that intensive.
Awesome. Well, Dan, Adam, thanks. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And I guess we'll see you all next week.
No one know how much code you hold, cause you know the 0-day heap will spray, clear the way if the log file touch, get your hard line cut. Number 2, never let them know your next move. Don't you know bad boys move in silence and pirate taken from your wireless? I done flashed mad chips with these hacks just to patch these bits. Number 3,